Welcome to the Syrupcast, MobileSyrup's Canadian tech-focused podcast. This week, yet again, we're talking about Apple stuff, but in particular, Apple's iPad line and how its current state. It's kind of difficult to know what iPad to purchase because it's a big lineup and there's a lot of different devices in there, and some of them offer relatively the same specs and features, and we're going to get into it. But I'm Patrick O'Rourke, and Brad Bennett, a man who refers to himself as the bad boy of tech. He's across the internet from me. How are you doing, Brad?
Terrible. The nothing event was before we recorded this podcast, and that put me in a terrible mood. If you can read my piece on it and you'll understand, so we won't get into it here, but that's how I am this morning.
Is it because there was nothing at the event?
Oh, precisely.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bravado, but I wasn't in for that.
Yeah. I think we may talk about it at some point, or may do an episode focused on like some of the smoke and mirrors surrounding tech events. That could be
I'd love to do an episode on like a nothing product, but they just don't release them. They just, like you said, smoke and mirrors.
You have the headphones coming though, don't you? The earbuds?
I actually do have the headphones finally. They're right here.
You have them. Okay.
Very cool to look at. That's all I'll say about those.
They're transparent. It makes me think of the transparent original Game Boy that I always wanted as a kid.
Yeah, me too. I had the Game Boy Advance. It was kind of fogged, but anyway, let's get into the iPad stuff. You want to talk about what your favorite iPad is?
What is the iPad in Apple's current lineup, in its current state, that is your favorite tablet?
Yeah, so mine, I actually don't have it because Alex is using it right now. So my favorite one is the iPad mini. And it's, I guess, both of our favorites. That's why she's using it. But we love the iPad mini. So I'll just go over why, sort of in point form. So first off, super portable. And I think that's the most important part. For me, I'm always more of a Mac guy for like my main computing device. So for an iPad, it's sort of like an auxiliary device. It's on the side. So having a larger iPad on the side, well, somewhat useful. And I have had this iPad Pro on my desk all week testing universal control. I find myself when I go out and when I want to do like iPad tasks, like reading on the couch or just taking it like with me to edit some photos on the go, the mini is just easier to take with me. And that's the one I use the most, the one I like the most, This screen could be a bit nicer, but it's got a little camera, it's got a little flash, has USB-C, which I think is very, very important. Support for the magnetic Apple Pencil 2. And the A15 chip is more than enough power, I think, for an iPad, especially the mini.
Is that jelly scrolling issue gone now?
No, but it's not, I'm hesitant to even call it an issue. It was so weird and only like appeared on certain websites when you were scrolling on like a very specific way and like had to be going at a specific speed. It was something that like I'd literally never noticed up until The Verge Dieter brought it up and was like, hey, this is an issue. So I guess if you're one of those people that notices like screen refresh rates and finds the like screen refresh rates aggravating, you might notice this. But for me, I'm more of they were talking about this in the latest Vergecast, but I think people either lean, what they were saying is people either lean refresh rate or for colors and like density. And I feel like I'm on the color density side. Like I want high packed like retina display, and I want punchy colors that really like help me with my photos. So I think the iPad mini is more than enough in that case. Although if they put an XDR display in it, I would be very happy. But I don't know if I'd want to pay for that.
I didn't think that I was the type of person that cared about display refresh rates until I started using the iPhone 13 like every day. And then, you just mentioned the
right.
SE. Like going back to that was, I think I said it in my review, it was jarring. Like I noticed it in ways that I didn't before, despite like reviewing Samsung devices that featured like a 90 hertz or 120 hertz refresh rate or whatever. And I've been thinking about it. I was trying to figure out why. It's like, I think it's because when I'm reviewing an Apple device, I end up hanging on to it, right? And I'm an Apple user. I use the iPhone all year long. So it's the phone that I'm using all the time. Whereas when I was doing a lot of our Samsung reviews, and Samsung was obviously one of the first companies to start pushing 90 hertz, 120 hertz variable refresh rates, all that fun stuff, I only would use them for like a couple months, right? Or even in some cases weeks, depending on when Samsung Canada wanted to take the device back. So maybe I saw the difference, but I didn't become used to it or something like that. And for me, that's one of the things that, like, when I think of the iPad mini, perfect device, all around perfect. But part of me wonders if going from the iPad Pro back to the mini, and I'll get into this when I talk about my favorite iPad, because that's also still a concern with that one. I wonder if it would bother me, right? Like I wonder if that like refresh rate issue would become frustrating and noticeable to me.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like definitely very subjective. So I've been using the 11-inch Pro on my desk with universal control, and that one also has the 120 hertz screen, just doesn't have XDR. I didn't notice that much of a difference between it and the new Air, but I definitely feel like I was noticing more of a difference between it and the $429 like base model iPad in Canada. And the bigger difference though for me, like I was saying, was the colors. Like the iPad Pro screen was like beautiful, and then the iPad screen was just looking a little washed out. Very similar to how you reacted to the 13 series versus the iPhone SE. I think it's a very similar like screen reaction I had.
So beyond the portability with the Mini, what are some of the other
Yeah.
notable features that you really like about it? Like, it doesn't have Face ID, obviously, right? It's got the side fingerprint sensor like the Air.
Yeah, and that actually I don't like. I wish it had Face ID. Face ID in the Pro is like super handy because I find that I'm like I don't know. I've been using it on my desk a lot, so just being able to swipe up and open it with Face ID instead of having to like type in my password, or on the iPads with Touch ID, you need to like rest your finger
Yeah,
on the power button on the side and then like hold it for a moment, and it's just like okay, and like that brief pause, that bit of hesitation, I really really don't like. And on top of that, depending on which case you're using, which is likely not an issue for most people, they only have one case. But I have the Folio. This is magnetic. I take it in and out a lot, and I like to hold it one way with the power button at the top and the volume buttons at the top as well. But when I put it in the case, it then like flips it, so the power button is like on the side at the bottom, and the volume buttons are like on the side at the other bottom. It's just it gets annoying, the button placement, and I mean I'm getting used to it, and it's like kind of nitpicky, but I wish there was like Face ID. I just didn't have to worry about it as much. I could just like, tap the screen and swipe up, and you know, the buttons are weird. Although I will say, I believe iPad OS 15.4 made it so that where the orientation of your iPad will determine which volume button is up and which volume button is down. Um, so I think
yeah,
that
I
should help my
believe it
problem with
does.
the
Yeah,
Mini. I just haven't used it since that update yet. But I think that will like solve my problem because maybe I'll like stop getting confused by the volume buttons every time I try to touch them.
and that was just like when I think of the Mini, that's what I always remember is that it was like this great size for playing video games on.
I think that's probably still true. I do like it for gaming. I'm not a huge mobile gamer, but I guess I'll say that I like you said, it's easier to like carry around. That leads into the
Yeah,
portability. It's just like it's not that much bigger than a phone. It's easy to hold in one hand, easy to like have curled up on the couch with. But I like it for first person shooters. I feel like
it's a
it's a
good
comfortable
point.
size for like on screen joysticks and stuff. Bigger iPads for games like Roller Coaster Tycoon that I play, or like Stardew Valley. I think I still would rather the bigger iPad and having like the more stretched out space. Just it's not that much larger. But you're right; those like certain games on the Mini, super super mint. And the fact that like I would say for men probably more than women, you can like kind of shove it in most back pockets, and that's pretty handy too.
It's a good point. Um,
So you can game on the go.
yeah,
Oh, and it has, if you want, it has 5G, but I mean, like, I don't think most people are paying for that, especially not just like people who want to game on the go. But having that connection on the go is pretty handy for like a little
I
iPad.
think I think about that sometimes. I think more people pay for those like iPad data plans than maybe we realize. Like they,
But I don't think it's people like
no,
us.
no,
I
no,
think
no,
it'd
no,
be,
no.
for me, I think it's people like living in like rural
Yep.
situations or who are using them for like work on the go a lot.
I
It's
just
not people who are just buying it so they can have another connected
I
device,
remember when I used to take the GO train to work, and I would literally see quite a few people using an iPad Pro as like their main computer, and they'd be like scrolling through spreadsheets and stuff, and I'd like glance at their screen, and they'd always be on data. Um, and I don't know if that's like a work thing where like their work is providing the data plan to them. That could be what it is. But
hmm
personally, I've never like had any desire because I would just connect tether to my phone, right? Like that's what I would do. I tethered my phone connection. I don't need a plan specifically for my iPad, but um, yeah, I'll go into the tablet, the iPad that is my personal favorite. I've always been a fan of, well, not always, because I was mainly a fan of the iPad Mini, but for me, the top tier um, iPad that I think offers a nice mix between high end features and price, especially now that it has the M1 chip, is the new
It's like the iPad for iPad
yeah,
lovers, you know?
is the new iPad Air. I think that it has a great design. It's cool that it's colorful. I personally preferred the side fingerprint sensor to Face ID as someone who uses an iPad Pro as like their daily iPad device. Um,
I'll concede to that because like anytime I'm holding it in landscape mode, which is most times, my hand does cover the Face ID
That's
sensor.
exactly what
Is
I was
that why
gonna
you don't
say.
like it?
Like half the
Yeah,
time Face ID doesn't work
it's
on it.
annoying.
I love that it's there. It's
Apple's
great.
Apple's got to put those webcams on the long
Yeah,
side.
I'm hoping that that changes the next iPad Pro. And I think the other thing that I really like about it is it works with the second gen Apple Pencil. I think 10.9 inches is a really nice size. It's like not too big, it's not too small. It's perfect for doing. It's not great for playing games. I know we just talked about that with the iPad Mini, but it's a screen that's big enough to let you do multitasking, typing, having multiple things opened at once. These aren't things that I do with my iPad all the time, but if I were to go out and get one, I would want one that felt like multi-purpose, right? Like that I kind of felt
That's
like I
fair.
could do whatever I needed to do with it. Um,
Yeah.
and for me, one of the big things is the price. Like it falls under the iPad Pro, obviously, but it still has the same chip. And I know the iPad Air often is the one that's like it kind of lands strangely in Apple's lineup because it at one point like the 2021 had a better chip than the iPad Pro. And I know in this case now it has the same chip as the iPad Pro. It's just and then the other thing that I wanted to mention before we hit the ad break is just like if you compare the new Air to the new Pro, they're so very similar. The only things that differentiate them,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned, are Face ID, which great, nice to have. I call it a nice to have. I'm fine.
I think most things would be nice to have. So
I'm
yeah.
fine with the side fingerprint sensor, and then the 120 hertz, and that's something that I kind of alluded to earlier. I haven't used the Air in quite some time, and I've been using a Pro for like a year now. One of my concerns would be like, would I notice that jump? Um, and I'm starting to think that I might. But if you haven't like experienced the jump to 120 hertz, I don't think you're gonna know. You're gonna know the difference. It takes some time to like, I don't know, have your brain adjust to it, and then when you go back, you really do see it, or at least I do. But if you haven't, you're
Yeah,
probably fine.
the Air I found wasn't too bad. I feel like it's really bright, really punchy, really vibrant, and like it didn't feel like an old
Okay, that's
display
good
in the
to know.
way that the SE or like the iPhone 11 feels it did. I think the biggest issue that I'm seeing people like comparing the iPhone or the iPad, yeah, wow, I want to call them by their numbers. The iPad Pro 11 inch and the iPad Air is simply the base model storage. So the iPad Air
Yes, yeah.
starts at like 749 for like 64 gigs, and then I think the iPad Pro
There's like a
starts
two
at like
hundred dollar
$200
difference.
more than that, but it's 128
Yeah.
gigs. And if you want to get, you can't get 128 gigs on the Air. It goes right up to 256, and then I believe it's more than the iPad Pro, which is just like now you're comparing apples and oranges, and people. It seems like you said the Face ID camera, the faster USB port, 128 hertz, nice to have, but people really do care about that storage, and finding the best like value for that is where this like weirdness is coming in this year.
So
I think.
here's a quick question before we hit the break.
Yep.
Why is storage that important to people? And I'm sort of playing devil's advocate a little bit here because so many things, so much of what we do is stored in the cloud now, right? Like photos, for the most part. I think a lot of people have some sort of like iCloud tiered subscription just because nobody ever deletes photos. At least most people I do. Most people I know I do. And then like what are you downloading on an iPad where you need that much space? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'll answer it, but while I answer it, I want you to open up your iPhone and tell me how much space you're using on it currently. But yeah, so
I'm gonna
basically
check.
for me, when I opened up the iPad Air, Apple sent me to review the larger 256 gig one. And just right off the hop, when I imported my like home like layout and my files and added my Apple ID to the new one, immediately more than 64 gigs were on it. And a lot of that is music, some of it's photos, some of
Music's a
it's
good
like
point. Okay.
apps, you know what I mean? Like you've got big apps, you've got a big or you got a big iPad, you want to play big apps. Like I downloaded Divinity 2 and it's like, that was a 12 gig
Sure.
app. So if you only got 64 gigs, that's like more than a fifth of your
Adobe
storage
apps are
or
big
about a
too.
fifth of your storage. Yeah, and they get bigger and bigger the more you use them, the more you save files
Okay.
within them, especially if you're a creative making like doodle books and stuff. That's building up. Like you're right, photos can store in the cloud, and you're probably not taking that many photos on the iPad. So most of the photos on there probably are cloud saved, unless you're doing like a lot of photo work. But also, yeah, that's a huge issue. Like if I was to be doing like photo editing projects, those could easily go over 64 gigs. Video editing is like not a chance it's under
It's a
64
good point.
gigs
Video.
unless it's something so small. Well, like if it's doing 4K, and because it's the M1, it's like, well, I can push 4K around, so I might as well. But fitting that stuff on there is tough. I don't have it here, but I have a Samsung T7 SSD hard drive, so I'm plugging that in. It's been working pretty well with the iPad, and you could do that if you had a 64 gig, but if you're trying to buy this as your main device, or I think people buying iPads want them to last like 4 or 5 years. Like an iPad doesn't go out of date as much as a phone. It feels like um, people just know storage fills up quickly, and I think in 2022, 64 is like the bare minimum. But my mom, I would probably still recommend the 64 gig iPad. If you were a student getting one for school, no, I think you would go through that so quickly and you'd be really mad at yourself. Like even it's like the same reason you wouldn't buy a 128 gig or a 256 gig MacBook right now. You know what I
Knows,
mean?
yeah.
It's like enough, but they're going to max it out in a year, and then where are they going to be? But yeah, how much is on your phone? How much do you use?
I've used 100 gigs of 500 gigs, which
See, you know
is
what I mean? That's
more
just a
than I
phone.
thought.
Like you didn't even. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like when I put the iPad on, and I was like, "Whoa, 75 gigs of stuff already." I was like, "Okay, I guess I got to go against this 64 gig thing," because without even realizing it, like all of my devices have more than that on them. It's just the nature of, and I know that I push things hard, but I think for most people that's not enough.
Yeah, no, those are good points. And we're gonna get into this in a bit, but like I think it ultimately comes down to like what you intend to use the iPad for, right? Like if you're using it as a media
Yeah.
consumption device and you don't plan to use it for productivity, which I think a lot of people do. We're gonna get into that.
Yep.
Um, maybe you could get away with the smaller size. But yeah, let's hit the ad break, and then we have a few more other topics we're gonna cover. So we alluded to it before, and we talked about the Air, and we talked about the current Pro, and we know there's going to be a Pro refresh coming in a couple months. It's just like scheduled; it's going to happen. Um,
Yeah.
but Bennett, how do you think the Pro currently fits into the iPad lineup? Like, who is it? Who is it for? I guess is what I'm really asking you.
So I don't know if the 11-inch Pro is for anyone right now, right?
No, you're
Like,
right. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like you get Face ID, slightly faster USB-C port, two cameras, a LiDAR sensor. I guess if you really needed that LiDAR sensor for work and your work wanted to buy you an iPad instead of like an iPhone 13, maybe you would get the 11 just to be cheaper. But like we just dig deeper and deeper and deeper into the niches as we like find uses for people who need the specific things that set the iPad Pro 11-inch apart. I think that one's been completely cannibalized by the iPad Air now that they're basically the same size, basically the same speed, offer the M1 chip. Like there's not a lot of difference between them. The iPad Pro 12 I think is for like iPad lovers just across the board who want to use an iPad as their main computer. Like if you were going to use an iPad as your main computer, we would need that like 13-inch. What is it? Is it 12 or 12.9 inches?
12.9 inches, I believe. I'll double check, but I
Yeah,
think it's
so tell me that's
12.9.
13-inch. Yeah, but it's basically the same
Yeah,
size like
it's
a
the
MacBook
same. It's
Air, and
like
I think that is like,
0.1 of an inch. Yeah, 12.9.
yeah, if I was using an iPad every single day for my main computer, I think I would want that extra screen real estate. You know what I mean? Like it's tough, still smaller than a computer, bigger than I would want in an iPad, I think, for like curling up on the couch. But if I'm gonna like want to get work done, I want that extra screen real estate for multitasking. And then yeah, I guess the iPad Air is kind of like you said, that middle ground for people who like really like iPads and want something useful, like or just
A device
I
that's a
don't know.
little more
I'm kind of like,
capable.
yeah, it's tough because I think it's like being marketed towards students and stuff. And I want to say like students all the way even through university, depending on what you're doing. I mean, if you're in a course where you need like a Windows computer to run CAD programs, obviously the iPad's not going to work
Yeah.
for you. But if you're just writing and researching essays over and over again and doing the odd slideshow, you're gonna be great with an iPad. You're gonna probably love it. And that's where I think like the Air fits in. And then the regular iPad, unfortunately, or wait, we skipped the Mini. The Mini is for like I think people who have MacBooks and also want iPads. That's my guess on the Mini. Or if you really just want an iPad to read on, it's like the most e-reader
Yeah.
size. And then the final iPad, it's over there, I can't reach it, is the 10.2 base model
The
iPad.
ancient looking one, the
Still
iPhone
has
SE
the,
of the iPad line.
yeah, pretty much. It still has a lightning connector. It's the only one with that. It still has a home button, which is actually pretty nice. Doesn't fit into the smart keyboard or the magic keyboard. It only fits in the smart keyboard folio. So there's no like good trackpad accessories. But I think that's the one for kids or maybe like really old people. Like if you wanted to give your kid an iPad and say they were in like I don't know. When do you think kids start needing computers in school now? Grade 5, grade 4? Like
I have
I'm
no
probably
idea.
underestimating. Yeah, but whenever your kid starts needing like computers in school, I think they would get away with an
You
iPad being
you used an
the first device
you used
there.
an iPad in high school, right?
Yeah, but I think, and okay, so I guess I'll clarify. Like, I could easily still get away with like a base model iPad in high school, and even that university situation that I outlined earlier, which was sort of like my post secondary situation, which is a lot of writing, researching, and slideshows. Probably could have gotten away with the base level iPad. I would have wanted an iPad Air just because it's a nicer iPad, and the Magic Keyboard is legit like the best iPad accessory ever made. Um, but I could have gotten through with the base model iPad. And yeah, I did in high school. Like through high school, I did use a base model iPad, like I don't know what, 10, 12 years ago, but probably 10 years ago. I don't know. But
Last year.
yeah. Yeah. No, my computer like history went from like a really old Toshiba
That's what I
satellite
had.
to being like, wow, I'm never carrying this around. This thing's like massive. Getting an iPad, absolutely loving it. Loving it for like taking notes, reading notes, studying, like researching things, writing essays. I was in love with the iPad. So small, just carried it around, felt like the superest nerd in my high
I
school.
had a massive
Although there were lots of kids that did that.
my first computer. Like I didn't have one in high school because nobody just I'm so old that nobody had laptops when I was in high school. But it was like an expectation that you needed to get one for university. Everybody had computers and laptops in university. All the rich kids had the white MacBook. I don't know if you've ever seen
Mm,
it, but it would
yeah, yeah, the plastic
go
one.
brittle on
Yeah,
the sides, and it would kind of turn yellow. And then the like super rich kids
yeah,
had the MacBook Pro that was like um, one of the early like brushed metal, like stainless steel, cool looking ones. And I would just like show up with my
yeah.
massive Toshiba satellite Windows laptop with like a battery so big that it like stuck out of the bottom of it and it like, weighed so much. I'd lug it back and forth from like because I commuted most of the time. I commuted from Brampton to Ryerson, and the GO train didn't run that frequently. And I would just be carrying this massive laptop back and forth all the time to class. And I would always have to plug it in. I'd
Yeah,
always have to like fight for the plug spot because otherwise the thing would die in like 20 minutes. Um, very
yeah.
different
That's the
world.
good thing with the iPad, honestly.
Um,
The iPad has great battery life.
but yeah, I guess
Although the new Macs do as
to
well.
bring it back to like what we're actually talking about and not me babbling about my giant Toshiba satellite that eventually cracked in the cold. Um,
Tough.
I I like the iPad. Um, I don't think there's like realistically, I don't see any manufacturer ever releasing an Android device that even comes close to it being as capable of what the iPad does. I know that Samsung continues to try, and I know that there's like some cool stuff with the Tab series. But out of curiosity,
Yeah, they're really nice hardware, but the software
just holds it back.
support on Android is really
Even the app
tough. And
ecosystem.
Dex is really annoying to use.
What do you use your iPad for? Like I can start. I primarily
Yeah,
use
go.
as someone who like I got a bunch of Macs. Like this is what I review for MobileSyrup. This is my thing. Along with managing the team, I write about Apple products, so I have tons. I realize that
Yeah.
I'm a bit of an outlier in that sense. Nobody has like 3 MacBook Pros and a Mac Studio and all this stuff around them. But I use my iPad primarily for editing photos. Like I'll do it's nice to like pick up my iPad, leave my office, go sit downstairs and edit photos. I'll like crop them, I'll size them, I'll like change the saturation, I'll do spot removal with the pen because I'm obsessed with removing dust.
But we should mention that's like what, like 15 photos, 20 photos, 30 photos, 100 photos.
Do you mean like
How many do you think you do
in like
in a session?
in a session?
Yeah. Like how casually are you editing photos on it? It really is the root of it.
I
You know
don't
what I mean?
do as much photography as I used to. But I would say like the Mac Studio that's beside me, I probably edited
Mm.
30 photos in that one
Yeah.
session.
I think that's a good amount for iPad. I feel like once it starts to get over a couple
Yeah,
hundred or even over 100, it starts to
I'm never
become
doing that much.
yeah.
So I use it for that.
But people do.
No,
We
I know
should
people
say
do.
people
Yeah,
do.
I
Yeah.
use it for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Use it for browsing social media. I find myself often just like watching movies and stuff on it, like in bed. Like I use it as like
Yeah.
a portable TV. And in that sense, I do appreciate the 120 hertz display. I do appreciate the mini LED that the iPad Pro offers. That's something that
Well, no, the 120 hertz display isn't doing anything for movies. Movies are clocked at 60 hertz, or not even 24 frames per second most of the time.
sure, yeah, not movies, but like
Like you're
browsing
not getting any.
and scrolling around and whatever. And there are certain games
Yeah,
that support the 120 hertz.
yeah,
I guess I was more referring to the mini LED. Like I do see a difference in
yeah,
screen
yeah, yeah.
in screen
That you're
quality and brightness when I'm watching stuff. Um, but like if you took the iPad Pro out of my like device equation, I would be fine. Like I would just do those same things
all of that
on my
on your
MacBook Pro
laptop.
or my phone. I wouldn't be editing photos on my phone, to be clear, but I could just take my MacBook Pro, set it up in the bedroom, and watch TV on it, right? I kind of use it
Yeah,
as a media consumption device. And with that in mind, in some sense, I would probably be fine with just the entry level iPad, the little baby old guy. Like the tech.
it just sucks that you're using the old Apple Pencil that sticks in the bottom at
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
point, and like,
But for
yeah,
the price and how much I use it, when I think about it,
no, for sure, that's
that's the
true.
one that
The
I would end
value
up going with if
proposition.
I was actually going to have to like go out and purchase it with my own money, because I primarily use it as a media consumption device. Like maybe if I did more photography at the site than I do now, it would be a little more worth it. But even then, like I can just do it on my MacBook Pro, right?
Yeah, and the screen on your iPhone is like just as good, to be honest. It's smaller, but um, when I bought this, I'm holding up for the audio listeners, holding up a SD card dongle with a lightning
Yep.
connector on it, and I bought this so I could put photos into the iPad. But guess where I use it all the time? My phone. I literally, if I'm doing so I talk a big game about bringing the iPad Mini out with me to do photos. But I'm gonna be honest, the last 3 times that I went out and did photos, it's just been my phone. Like I was using the iPad Mini a lot more, but now that Alex uses it a bit more, and by saying Alex used it, we used it mostly as our like teleprompter screen because it's small. It
Yeah,
fits in our tiny
it does work
teleprompter, so
great
we
for
use it a
that
lot
too.
for that. Um, Alex is doing like a thing right now where she's just trying to like live multiple weeks on iPad. So she was like originally on the Mini, and now she's trying the iPad Air because it has the smart keyboard. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, like when it comes down to it, a lot of like the casual things that I do on the iPad, if I only had my phone to do them, I would be okay. You know what I mean? Like when I'm out taking street photos, I don't need to like blow them up on a Mac screen and pick out the
Yeah,
dust and
exactly.
all this little like things that I would be doing with a like a work photo. It's like I can just throw it in my phone, tweak the curves in Lightroom
And
a
then set
bit,
it up,
tweak the
send it
like you
out.
said the saturation stuff, and like just send it to Instagram. And like the fact that this adapter is super tiny, fits in my pocket, and so is this phone is kind of handy. That being said, the iPad Mini also kind of does, but you do have to have like a small bag at that point. If you're carrying around a big camera, you probably have a bag for that, which is what I do. But sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's just the camera around my neck and the iPhone in my pocket, and that's enough. Which is really, as I've been doing this universal control story this week, is really what I've like been struggling the most with. Is just like, how do I fit the iPad into my life? My phone and my MacBook can do pretty much everything the iPad can do, either better or slightly worse. You
That's
know,
always been
like what? It's hard to find one thing that the iPad just becomes perfect at.
that's always been my issue with the iPad. I don't know how it fits into my workflow. And yeah, I just wanted to mention universal control is crazy. It feels like magic when it's working. Again, I don't know what I'm going to use it for. I'm still trying to figure that out, but it's cool. And it's one of the most,
Same.
like, I didn't think it would work, but it lives up to my expectations. And it's super neat, especially if you have multiple Apple devices. But what you're saying sort of brings me to the last thing that I wanted to talk about on this podcast episode. It's so hard to find a way, at least for me, and I know that this is a very specific us tech guy problem, to fit the iPad Pro into my workflow. Um, if it ran Mac OS, that would be a different story, and I think it would make it a far more capable device. Do I ever think that
Yeah.
Apple's going to do that? No, I don't think that we're ever going to see Mac OS on an iPad, but that's the question that I wanted to pose to you. Do you think that's going to happen at some point? I know we've seen like a little bit of a mix of them in some sense. Like Mac OS is
Yeah. This
in a way like
universal control is blurring
it
the
blurs the
lines
lines.
for sure.
Universal control. Mac OS in a sense like is more like I know it's still mouse and trackpad oriented, but the design is a little more. It takes like DNA from
Touchable.
iPad OS, if that makes sense. You have like the trackpad on the
Yep.
iPad OS side of things, which I think was an absolute game changer. It works really good, and it's probably one of the best examples of um, like Apple iPad OS software integration across like a bunch of different apps. It just works, like even if an app hasn't been optimized for it for the most part. Yeah,
Not quite though. Yeah. Like it'll work. Like you can use it in Google Docs, but the dot is always a dot. It won't go into like cursor mode, so
interesting.
you
Okay,
can't like highlight text really easily. But like so yeah, as I've been when I was using the iPad for like the week when I reviewed it, I was writing everything in Pages because Pages supports the cursor, like how the what's it called? Yeah, the cursor morphs from dot to line. I
yeah,
guess I don't know. Getting into
it's
weird
contextual,
specifics
like
for this little tiny
changes.
dot thing. Yeah, but that contextual thing wasn't working in Google Docs, and I could totally work within Google Docs using the dot version. Like it's totally usable, better than Dex, but not fully optimized like Pages was, which is sad because I think a lot of people who would be using iPads would be using Google Docs because of its like cloud nature.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess just the apps that I use, I
Oh
haven't
yeah,
run into any issues. It depends on what you're using, right? Like what you're running on it.
yeah, that's absolutely. But yeah, to answer your question, will we ever see Mac OS on the iPad or the touchscreen Mac? That's kind of been like the root of my script for the universal control video right now. It's just like they're blurring the lines so much. I don't know how, like, it's so cool to use. It's almost like blindingly cool. Like, whenever like today, I was watching the Nothing event. So my third monitor over here isn't working. This is a whole other podcast we could do about the HDMI port coming back on the MacBook Pro and just being a huge pain in my bum for the past, like,
Yeah, you
I went
hate
through
the new
five
guy.
different HDMI cables. I went through 5 different HDMI cables and none of them work with my display. It like turns on randomly now, like the light comes on and it's in max settings, but it won't show up on the thing. I don't
I
know what's
had
going
well,
on.
you know about the issues that I had with the first gen
Yeah.
M1 MacBook Pro that featured the old design. I couldn't get it to work with my
Mhm.
monitor right over USB-C. So I don't know if it's the fault of the port. I'm here defending all HDMI ports over here. I think it might just be the nature of like Apple's board or something like that. Because it was a mess
Yeah,
last year
something's
too
being weird.
with the adapters and stuff like that.
But anyway, since my external display is broken, I've been leaning heavily on universal control now. So this morning when I was watching the Nothing event, I had it full screened on YouTube on the iPad, and I was just taking iPad screenshots, and then would go into the Photos app and drag those
Huh?
screenshots on my Mac desktop so I could size them for my story. And that worked out pretty well. Did it work out more efficiently than having an actual third display on my Mac?
Yeah.
No. Would I maybe have been better off using Sidecar in that situation? Maybe. But it was an interesting universal control thing. It worked without hiccups and went pretty smoothly. That's, yeah. I don't know where I was going with that
Well,
other
do you think
than
you're
like, yeah, I'm starting to see the lines blur.
so? Do you think
And
that someday
it's,
that might happen? Like, do you think that that's something that Apple would do, having Mac OS running on an iPad?
I like to think so. I want it to happen. I do. I think that's where it needs to go. I think that's why they separated out iPad OS, is so that it could become more Mac like. I don't know if they'll make it exactly Mac OS or if iPad OS will be like a mix of both. They're talking about this Apple foldable that will be a mix of both. And there's an iPhone 11 chip in the studio display. Like, I don't know if all these clues are leading us towards being this blending of Mac OS and iOS slash iPad OS. But, when you look at the clues leading up to universal control, like handoff, cloud copy paste, all the different things. I wish I had my script open. I had so many examples of like, as we're getting closer and closer to universal control, like sidecar, like everything was a hint. It doesn't seem like universal control is the end of that hint dropping things. It just seems like another hint towards the master plan of like one unified OS that's working across all these devices. Because with them being different right now, it's so hard to find a reason to want to meld them. Except, so I think they need to be the same. I guess to answer your original question in the most like longest roundabout way, I think Mac OS comes to iPad at some point, or iPad OS morphs to become very Mac OS
That's
like,
what
which is maybe more
that's
likely.
what I think will happen. I think that we'll continue to see the lines blur, but that I don't think that we're ever going to be like, you buy an iPad and you have the option of installing iPad OS or Mac OS. That's not going to be a thing. But we're going to see those walls fall down a little bit more over the next couple of years. And you're right, universal control is one step to that. And
Yeah, I'd love to see the next thing be just Mac OS apps on iPad. Universal control would make a lot more sense if I could have the Mac OS version of like Finder on my iPad
that would
and
be
Photoshop,
cool. But then you'd end up having two different
Like
versions.
if I could drag a window between iPad and Mac OS, huge game changer. You can't even do that right now with Safari windows.
Yeah,
Like if you want to pop a Safari window out of your iPad and bring it into macOS, doesn't
that was
work.
the first thing I tried to do when I set up Universal Control, and I was like, "What? This is
Yeah,
garbage."
yeah, it was like, this has to work. No, it didn't. Yeah, but it's weird. But I think they will blend, and I think they have to.
Yeah.
Every year we just see people complaining about iPads being more limited, and Apple is making them more functional. It's just been really slow, and I think that marches towards making them feature parity. I guess I don't know.
So I think that
iPhone for life.
iPhone for life. Yeah, just use the iPhone. It's simpler. I think that's probably a good
Yeah.
place to wrap it up. This is a bit of a shorter episode about a very specific topic. Something that's a little bit different for us. We're busy this week, but we still wanted to get an episode up. So let us know what you think about this format. It's a little more focused. There's not all these segments. It's just about one thing. Let us know if you think that's cool and useful. But as always, you can find me on Twitter at Patrick_Rourke, and of course on MobileSyrup.com. I haven't been doing much writing lately. I'm doing a lot of behind the scenes fun management stuff and lots of meetings and that lovely
I
stuff.
think your Mac Studio piece is really great, though.
That's true. I did write the Mac Studio piece. I was allowed out of my managing editor jail for a day to work on that. And I will have a story about the Steam Deck in the coming weeks. I'm thinking I'm probably going to do it next week, and it's going to just I was going to do something different with it, but I think I want to just do a straight up review, even though it's a little later than other people's. Simply because the situation with the Steam Deck's changed a bit. There's been a few updates, and it's far more capable than it was even just a couple weeks ago. It's like I call it like a fluid device. Things change like daily, and that's not even me exaggerating. Like one day, like a new update will come out, and like a bunch of games will work better with it, or they'll totally change the like ability to shift settings of games, so that you can lower the settings so they'll better run on it. Like things are always changing with it, so I think I will end up doing just a straight review rather than more of an opinion piece like I had originally planned. But yeah, Bennett, where can people find you? And do you have any recent stories or videos you want to highlight?
Yeah, so you can find me on MobileSyrup.com, where that's where most of my work is published. Just this morning, I published a piece about the Nothing phone, which we kind of talked about a bit here, and I think it's worth reading. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think I cut through the presentation really cleanly, because Nothing is overhyping everything, and it's just terrible. I'm done with it. I'm done with these events to hype up events that are coming in the future. Like, that's nuts. I don't have the time for that. And then on top of that, last week we got tons of stuff up on the YouTube channel. I have a video kind of related to this about iPad versus MacBook Air, iPad Air versus MacBook Air, kind of Apple's Air fight, where just two M1 chips and two Air named devices, which one is better in drawing, photo editing, benchmarks, battery life. I just kind of went through a bunch of things, did some tests, and just kind of laid out what I think, which one students would like, which ones people would like. And it's actually a lot closer of a fight than I even imagined going into it. And then beyond that, what else do I have? Oh, we have the iPad buying guide. That was the last thing I wanted to mention. It's on MobileSyrup.com too. And if you're just interested in iPads and buying guides, we'll actually probably have this linked below if you're on YouTube, but we have a full written buying guide that lays this out a lot more straightforwardly. If you're, just looking for more pros and cons towards each iPad.
We're hoping to do more of those too.
And
for different products.
Yeah, and I think we're trying to keep them alive longer too. This iPad buying guide will stay around when the next iPad comes out. We'll just update it with new iPad information, because most of the iPads probably won't change when that happens. So trying to do things like that a little more. And the last thing I'll say is you can follow me anywhere online at the Bradfad.
Cool. And as always, you can find all of our content on MobileSyrup.com, and also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at MobileSyrup. Thanks for watching and or listening. See you.
Peace.